So the next word that we want to understand, or the next phrase, is what is a withholding agent? And a withholding agent is a pretty important thing because a withholding agent is linked to a payor, and a payor is linked to an employer, and then you've also got this beneficial owner that comes into play. But those three terms, payor, employer, and withholding agent, are all related to each other. So it's important to understand what a withholding agent is by its definition. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at 7701A16, which is withholding agent, which states, the term withholding agent means any person required to deduct and withhold any tax under the provisions of section 1441, 42, 43, and 61. Again, if you remember from the previous video, we concluded that those things were all for money being received or sent to a non-resident alien from U.S. sources. So it's U.S. source income being paid to a non-resident alien. So that is what a withholding agent is. It doesn't say anything about a withholding agent being an employer that is taking money out of an employee's paychecks, because remember, we got to get to those definitions. They matter. So for right now, a withholding agent is strictly someone that is holding money, or that is going to be paying money. They're in control of that money that is eventually making its way to a non-resident alien. So if we look in, this is a CFR 1.1441.7 general provisions. It says, for purposes of Chapter 3, non-resident alien stuff, of the Internal Revenue Code and the regulations under such chapter, the term withholding agent means any person, U.S. or foreign, that has control, receipt, custody, disposal, or payment of any item of income of a foreign person subject to withholding. So again, they have to be subject to withholding, and they have to be foreign. And if you're in control of that, then you're classified as a withholding agent. And then we've come down here to withholding of tax on a foreign person. It says it prescribes, and these are paraphrases within the code. You can look up the actual code if you want to see what the whole thing says. It prescribes procedures to determine whether an amount must be withheld under Chapter 3 of the Code, and documentation that a withholding agent may rely upon to determine the status of a payee. So now we got a payee that's involved here. That's the person actually being paid, is a beneficial owner. Well, actually, it says if the status of a payee or a beneficial owner. So a payee and a beneficial owner are, or could be, two different things, as a U.S. person. So could either one of them be a U.S. person or as a foreign person, and other relevant characteristics of the payee that may affect a withholding agent's obligation to withhold under Chapter 3 of the Code. We go on. So in other words, they're being paid on behalf of a foreign person. And then we've got this presumptions of status, which is something that we kind of touched on earlier. A withholding agent may reply, and I'm again paraphrasing, this is the exact words, but I've pulled a couple sections out so you don't have all the fluff in it. A withholding agent may rely on the presumptions of this paragraph to determine the status of the person receiving the payment as a U.S. or a foreign person for the determination of a withholding and reporting requirements applicable to payments to a person presumed to be a U.S. person. See Chapter 61. That's payroll tax. So we've just gone from 1441, which is non-resident alien, and now we're being pushed back to the payroll tax stuff for this withholding agent. In other words, they're linked together. And so we are going to get into a payor, which is going to be a pretty quick video because a payor is a withholding agent. They're one and the same thing. In fact, I'll probably skip the payor video because a withholding agent and an employer, a withholding agent are both related. And here I'll go ahead and get into the employer. So we'll save having to do a separate video about an employer. But it says, this is in 3401, this is the payroll stuff. If the person for whom services are or were performed does not have legal control of the payment of the wages, and we'll get into wages, but of the wages for such services, the term employer means, except for the purpose of the thing, the person having such control. So For example, where wages, and that's your payroll stuff, such as certain types of pensions or retirement pay or trust, a person for whom services were performed has no legal control over the payment of such wages. The trust is the employer. So in other words, the person that having control over those funds is the employer, which means we already know a withholding agent's defined the same way. They're in control of the funds of a non-resident alien, and now we've got an employer that is using the same verbiage for its control over the payment. So employer, payor, withholding agent are synonyms. They all mean the same thing. So we'll move on to the next phrase in the next video.